Right now, at this exact moment, in the Gulf of Oman, the USS Ronald Reagan carrier strike group has been intercepted by what U.S. Fifth Fleet is calling multiple Iranian submarine contacts operating in coordinated formation just 18 nautical miles from the carrier's position. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy commander posted on Telegram 23 minutes ago claiming Iranian submarines have established weapons lock on the American carrier. The Pentagon spokesperson just told reporters, "We are aware of Iranian naval activity and are monitoring the situation." Two contradictory narratives. One from a regime that just conducted ballistic missile tests during active diplomatic talks. One from a military command whose carrier operations in the region have been continuous for decades. One of them is either lying or catastrophically misunderstanding what's happening beneath the surface of the Gulf of Oman right now. Let me walk you through exactly what happened. At 0342 hours local time this morning, Tuesday, March 10, 2026, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group was conducting routine flight operations approximately 40 nautical miles northeast of Muscat, Oman, in international waters of the Gulf of Oman. The strike group's composition included the Ronald Reagan herself, the Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser USS Antietam, and three Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Milius, USS Higgins, and USS Howard. At 0358 hours, according to multiple sources within U.S. Central Command speaking to Reuters and confirmed by AFP, the strike group's sonar operators detected what they initially classified as subsurface contacts of interest at bearing 270 degrees, range approximately 22 nautical miles. Within 6 minutes, by 0404 hours, the contact classification upgraded to multiple probable submarines, with acoustic signatures suggesting diesel-electric propulsion. At 0411 hours, the Ronald Reagan altered course from heading 090 to heading 045, increasing speed from 12 knots to 18 knots while simultaneously launching two MH-60R Seahawk helicopters equipped with dipping sonar and sonobuoys. By 0428 hours, the helicopter crews confirmed detection of what they assessed as three distinct submarine contacts, all maintaining depth between 100 and 150 meters, all tracking toward the carrier strike group's previous position. At 0445 hours, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command elevated the alert status for all Fifth Fleet assets in the region. At 0507 hours, Iran's IRGC Navy commander Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri posted to his verified Telegram channel claiming Iranian submarines had successfully intercepted the American carrier group and achieved tactical positioning. At 0521 hours, Pentagon spokesperson Major General Pat Ryder told reporters during an emergency press briefing that U.S. forces were operating safely in international waters and monitoring Iranian naval activity that we assess as unprofessional and potentially unsafe. The current status, as of this recording, is that the Ronald Reagan Strike Group has maneuvered to a position approximately 65 nautical miles northeast of its original location. The submarine contacts have maintained pursuit but fallen to trailing position at approximately 35 nautical mile separation, and both American and Iranian forces remain at elevated alert status, with no shots fired and no aggressive actions beyond the initial interception maneuver. To understand what's actually happening here, you need to understand Iran's submarine capabilities and what they can and cannot realistically accomplish against a U.S. carrier strike group. Iran operates three classes of submarines that could potentially be involved in this encounter. First, the Fateh-class submarines, Iran's newest domestic design. The Fateh is a diesel-electric attack submarine, displacing approximately 600 tons submerged, with a length of 48 meters and a crew of approximately 21. These boats are equipped with four 533mm torpedo tubes capable of firing both anti-ship torpedoes and potentially anti-ship cruise missiles. The Fateh class has an operational depth rating of approximately 200 meters and a maximum submerged speed of about 11 knots on battery power. Iran has constructed at least 3 confirmed Fateh-class boats. Fateh itself commissioned in 2019, Besat believed operational in 2022, and a third unit whose name hasn't been publicly confirmed but is assessed operational as of late 2024. Second, the Tarek-class submarines, which are actually Russian-built Kilo-class diesel-electric boats that Iran purchased in the 1990s. Iran operates 3 Tarek-class boats, Tarek, Noor, and Yunus. These are substantially larger than the Fateh class, displacing approximately 3,000 tons submerged, with 6 533mm torpedo tubes and capacity for 18 weapons, including torpedoes and mines. The Kilo-class boats are significantly quieter than the Fateh class when operating properly, though Iran's Kilos are now 3 decades old, and maintenance quality is questionable. Maximum submerged speed is approximately 17 knots on battery power, with operational depth similar to the Fateh at around 240 meters. Third, Iran operates a fleet of Ghadir-class midget submarines, tiny boats displacing only about 120 tons designed primarily for coastal operations and special forces insertion. The Ghadir class is completely unsuitable for open ocean pursuit of a carrier strike group and almost certainly is not involved in this encounter, based on the reported acoustic signatures suggesting diesel-electric propulsion and the operational area in the Gulf of Oman rather than shallow coastal waters. The most likely scenario is that Iran deployed either multiple Fateh-class boats or a combination of Fateh and Tarek-class submarines. Here's what these capabilities actually mean in tactical terms. Iranian submarines, even operating at their maximum theoretical performance, cannot sink a U.S. carrier strike group. This needs to be stated clearly because the Iranian propaganda and some sensationalist Western media coverage creates impression that submarines achieving weapons lock represents imminent threat of successful attack. The reality is far more complex. A modern U.S. carrier strike group represents the most sophisticated anti-submarine warfare capability ever deployed. The strike group's ASW assets include the carrier's embarked helicopters, typically 8 to 10 MH-60R Seahawks, each equipped with dipping sonar, sonobuoys, magnetic anomaly detectors, and anti-submarine torpedoes. The destroyers and cruisers carry hull-mounted and towed array sonar systems capable of detecting submarine contacts at ranges exceeding 50 nautical miles in favorable acoustic conditions. Each surface combatant carries anti-submarine rockets and torpedoes launched from both surface tubes and helicopter delivery. The strike group almost certainly has a Los Angeles or Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine operating in direct support, though the Navy never confirms submarine locations. That American SSN alone outmatches the entire Iranian submarine fleet. It's faster, quieter, deeper diving, better armed, and crewed by personnel with vastly superior training. Moreover, Iran's submarines face catastrophic operational limitations. Diesel-electric boats must periodically snorkel to recharge batteries, during which they become dramatically more detectable. Submerged endurance is measured in days, not weeks. Their relatively slow submerged speed means that once a carrier strike group maneuvers away, the submarines cannot keep pace. Their weapons, primarily straight-running and wire-guided torpedoes, have limited range compared to American anti-submarine systems. Iranian crews, while motivated and brave, lack the decades of operational experience and sophisticated training that U.S. submarine forces receive. So, what actually happened here? Iran most likely positioned submarines along projected carrier transit routes, achieved initial detection when the Reagan group passed within detection range, and briefly established a favorable geometric position that, in a shooting war, might have allowed torpedo launch. This is what IRGC claims as weapons lock, not that they had the carrier actively targeted by fire control systems, but that they achieved tactical positioning where an attack would have been theoretically possible. The U.S. response, course alteration, speed increase, and aggressive ASW prosecution with helicopters demonstrates that American forces detected the submarines and maneuvered to eliminate any potential threat geometry. The Iranians could not keep pace with the carrier group's 18-knot speed for extended duration without draining their batteries and forcing a snorkel, at which point they would become sitting ducks for American ASW aircraft. Here's why this matters strategically, and why this incident represents genuinely significant escalation despite the tactical mismatch I just described. From Iran's perspective, this operation serves multiple calculated purposes that have nothing to do with actually sinking an American carrier. First, this is strategic messaging during a critical diplomatic moment. According to Reuters reporting from Vienna and confirmed by the New York Times, Iranian and American negotiators have been conducting indirect talks through Omani mediators concerning Iran's nuclear program, with potential framework agreement discussions scheduled for March 15th, just 5 days from now. Iran's submarine deployment demonstrates to both American negotiators and Iran's own hardline domestic constituencies that Iran possesses military options and will not negotiate from a position of pure weakness. This is classic deterrent signaling. Iran is saying, we can impose costs on American military presence even if those costs are ultimately limited and would invite devastating retaliation. Second, this operation exploits a genuine American vulnerability. U.S. carriers are extraordinarily powerful, but they're also extraordinarily valuable, arguably irreplaceable symbols of American military dominance. The U.S. has only 11 carriers total, and losing even one would represent a catastrophic military and political blow. Iran doesn't need to actually sink a carrier to achieve strategic effect. Merely demonstrating the theoretical capability to threaten one creates deterrent value. Third, this plays into Iran's broader area denial strategy across the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. Iran has invested heavily in what military analysts call A2AD, anti-access, area denial, capabilities designed to make American military operations in the region costly and risky. This includes coastal missile batteries, fast attack craft, mines, and submarines. Each element alone might be relatively weak, but the combined effect forces American forces to operate with caution and expend resources on force protection. According to Dr. Brian Clark, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and former special assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations, Iran's submarine force is small and technologically limited compared to major naval powers, but in the confined waters of the Gulf and approaches, even limited submarine capabilities force American commanders to treat every subsurface contact as a potentially lethal threat. This operational caution is itself a form of strategic success for Iran. From the American perspective, this incident creates a difficult calculation. The United States cannot appear weak or allow Iran to operate submarines aggressively against carrier strike groups without response. At the same time, American strategic objectives in the region involve avoiding major military escalation that would derail diplomatic efforts, spike global oil prices, and potentially draw the United States into yet another Middle Eastern conflict at a time when strategic focus has shifted toward China. The Biden administration, according to reporting from Politico and The Washington Post, has been pursuing a de-escalation through engagement strategy with Iran, seeking to revive some version of the 2015 nuclear deal framework while managing regional tensions. This submarine incident threatens that strategy by creating pressure from congressional Republicans and regional allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia for aggressive American response. According to Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas and member of the Armed Services Committee, speaking to Fox News this morning, Iran just threatened an American aircraft carrier with submarines. That's an act of war. The Biden administration's weakness invited this aggression, and now we need overwhelming military response to reestablish deterrence. This political pressure constrains American diplomatic flexibility. The incident also reveals interesting dynamics in Iran's internal power structure. According to analysis from Karim Sajjadpour, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the IRGC Navy operates with substantial autonomy from Iran's civilian government and even from the regular Iranian Navy. These submarine deployments likely reflect hardline factions within the IRGC seeking to demonstrate strength and possibly undermine moderate elements who favor diplomatic engagement. This suggests the submarine operation might not reflect unified Iranian strategic planning, but rather internal factional competition where hardliners use military operations to create facts on the ground that constrain diplomatic options. This dynamic creates additional escalation risk because American responses to IRGC provocations might inadvertently strengthen the very hardline factions whose influence the U.S. seeks to diminish. There are three realistic scenarios for how this crisis develops over the next 72 hours, each with distinct probability profiles and strategic logic. Scenario 1. Tactical de-escalation with diplomatic messaging. Probability assessment, 40%. In this scenario, both sides treat the submarine encounter as one-time demonstration of capabilities without seeking sustained confrontation. Iran recalls its submarines from forward positions, possibly claiming successful completion of naval exercises to allow domestic face-saving. The United States adjusts carrier strike group operating patterns to maintain greater distance from Iranian coastal waters while continuing presence missions in the region. Behind the scenes, both sides use the incident as leverage in ongoing indirect diplomatic talks. Iran demonstrates it possesses military options, while the United States emphasizes that carrier strike groups can operate effectively despite harassment. This scenario requires several conditions to materialize. First, no further Iranian submarine operations in the next 48 hours. Any additional intercept attempts would establish pattern of harassment rather than one-time demonstration, forcing stronger American response. Second, restraint from both sides' hardline factions. Iranian hardliners must accept that the operation achieved sufficient messaging value without requiring follow-up action. American hawks must accept that diplomatic pressure rather than military retaliation represents appropriate response. Third, continued progress in indirect nuclear talks. If diplomatic channel remains viable, both sides have incentive to manage military tensions rather than allowing them to derail negotiations. Fourth, no unexpected escalation from other actors. Israel, Saudi Arabia, or UAE operations against Iranian interests could create new crisis dynamics overwhelming attempts at bilateral de-escalation. The strategic logic supporting this scenario is that neither side actually wants major military confrontation right now. Iran's economy remains under severe strain from sanctions and cannot afford the destruction that would follow American military strikes. The United States faces multiple global strategic challenges, including China, Russia, and cannot afford resource-intensive Middle Eastern military campaigns. Both sides have incentive to use military incidents as signaling and negotiating leverage rather than preludes to war. Scenario 2. Sustained low-level maritime confrontation. Probability assessment, 45%. In this scenario, the submarine incident becomes the first in a series of Iranian maritime operations designed to harass American naval presence without crossing thresholds that would trigger major military response. Iran continues deploying submarines to shadow American carriers, positions fast attack craft to conduct close approaches to U.S. naval vessels, and possibly deploys additional mines in international shipping lanes. The United States responds with increasingly aggressive force protection measures, including warning shots, interdiction operations against Iranian vessels, and possible limited strikes against Iranian naval facilities. This scenario creates sustained crisis atmosphere without escalating to full-scale military conflict. The required conditions for this scenario include Iranian strategic calculation that sustained low-level harassment achieves better results than either backing down or escalating dramatically. IRGC leadership assesses that constant pressure on American forces demonstrates Iranian capabilities to domestic and regional audiences while avoiding the threshold crossings that would justify massive American retaliation. This also requires American political willingness to accept ongoing harassment without large-scale military response. The Biden administration calculates that managing low-level provocations while maintaining carrier presence demonstrates resolve without triggering war. Both sides essentially engage in competitive risk-taking where each tests the other's tolerance for escalation. According to Michael Singh, managing director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, we've seen this pattern before in Gulf waters, the 1987-88 tanker war, the various confrontations in 2019 and 2020. Iran probes American responses. The U.S. establishes boundaries through limited force. Both sides eventually settle into a tense equilibrium. The danger is that this equilibrium can break down through miscalculation or accidents. The strategic logic here is that sustained confrontation serves both sides' domestic political needs while avoiding catastrophic escalation. Iran demonstrates resistance to American pressure without inviting regime-threatening retaliation. The United States maintains military presence and demonstrates willingness to defend forces without launching war. Both sides use the confrontation to justify their broader strategic approaches to domestic audiences. Scenario 3. Major escalation through miscalculation or deliberate threshold crossing. Probability assessment, 15%. This is the nightmare scenario where the submarine incident triggers escalation spiral leading to large-scale military conflict. This could occur through several pathways. First, an accident or miscalculation. An Iranian submarine commander, operating under strict radio silence and unable to receive updated orders, decides to fire warning torpedo that American forces interpret as actual attack, triggering immediate anti-submarine warfare prosecution that sinks the Iranian boat. Iran retaliates for what it views as unprovoked attack on submarines operating in international waters. American carriers launch strikes against Iranian coastal missile batteries. Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz and activates proxy forces across the region. Within 72 hours, we have regional war. Second, deliberate Iranian escalation. Hardline IRGC commanders decide that the submarine operation's success requires follow-up demonstration. Iranian submarines or fast attack craft conduct actual attack against American vessel, perhaps a supply ship or destroyer rather than the carrier itself, causing American casualties but avoiding the political impossibility of sinking a carrier. The Trump administration faces overwhelming domestic pressure for massive retaliation. American strikes target not just naval facilities but IRGC command infrastructure, possibly including leadership compounds in Tehran. Iran responds with ballistic missile strikes against American bases in Qatar, UAE, and Bahrain, and activates Hezbollah for attacks against Israel. The regional war everyone feared becomes reality. Third, Israeli unilateral action. Israel, viewing the submarine incident as evidence of dangerous Iranian escalation and fearing American diplomatic engagement might lead to new nuclear deal, conducts strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran retaliates against both Israel and American forces in the region, correctly assessing that Israeli operations occurred with at least tacit American knowledge. The United States finds itself drawn into conflict it didn't initiate but cannot avoid. The required conditions for catastrophic escalation include breakdown of command and control on either side, domestic political dynamics that override strategic calculation, or third-party actions that force American and Iranian responses. The strategic logic, or more accurately, the failure of strategic logic in this scenario is that once certain thresholds are crossed, both sides face domestic political impossibility of backing down even when both would prefer to avoid full-scale war. American presidents cannot ignore dead sailors. Iranian supreme leaders cannot ignore strikes on Iranian territory without massive retaliation. The action-reaction cycle becomes self-sustaining regardless of initial intentions. Watch for 5 critical indicators over the next 48 to 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, Iranian submarine movements. If submarine contacts disappear from American sonar tracks and Iranian naval vessels return to port, de-escalation scenario becomes most likely. If submarines maintain forward positions or additional boats deploy, sustained confrontation scenario becomes probable. If submarines begin operating in wolf-pack coordination or move into optimized attack positions, escalation risk increases dramatically. Second, American carrier operating patterns. If the Ronald Reagan strike group resumes normal flight operations at previous distance from Iranian coast within 48 hours, American assessment is that threat has passed. If carriers maintain increased separation from Iranian waters and reduce operating tempo, American commanders are treating Iranian capabilities as ongoing concern requiring adjustment. If additional American carrier strike groups deploy toward the region, or if bombers stage through regional bases, military confrontation preparation is underway. Third, diplomatic channel status. If Omani mediators announce that scheduled March 15th talks will proceed as planned, diplomatic track remains viable and both sides seek to manage military tensions. If talks are postponed or canceled, diplomatic option has failed and military confrontation becomes more likely. If talks proceed but with expanded agendas including discussion of military incidents, both sides are attempting to use the crisis as negotiating leverage. Fourth, oil market reactions. If Brent crude prices remain below $82 per barrel where they currently trade, markets are pricing in low probability of sustained conflict. If prices spike above $88, markets are pricing in elevated conflict risk and potential supply disruption. If prices exceed $95, markets believe Strait of Hormuz closure or major military conflict is probable. Fifth, regional ally positioning. If Israel announces new military exercises or moves air defense systems, Israeli assessment is that conflict probability has increased. If Saudi Arabia and UAE begin diplomatic outreach to Iran through back channels, regional powers are seeking to prevent escalation. If American forces in Iraq and Syria go to heightened alert status, assessment is that Iranian proxy forces might activate. Monitor these 5 indicators. They will tell you whether we're looking at successful crisis management, sustained but manageable confrontation, or the early stages of the regional war everyone fears. The talks in Oman are still scheduled, the submarines are still out there. The carrier strike group is operating at 18 knots, creating distance from the contact area. Neither side is backing down, but neither side has fired a shot. This is the moment of maximum uncertainty before the trajectory becomes clear. What happens in the next 72 hours determines whether this becomes a footnote in the long history of US-Iran tensions or the incident that triggered everything. I'm tracking this situation minute by minute. I have access to ship tracking networks, satellite imagery providers, and monitoring of both American and Iranian military communications patterns. When the next development breaks, when submarines surface or attack, when carriers alter course or launch strikes, when diplomats announce breakthrough or breakdown, you will understand what it means here before mainstream media even reports the basic facts. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. You need to know what happens next, and you need analysis that goes beyond the superficial headlines. I provide the technical details, the strategic context, and the scenario modeling that lets you understand not just what's happening, but why it matters and where it's going. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Iran's submarines represent genuine threat to American carriers, or is this pure theater? Do you think the Biden administration will respond with military force or diplomatic pressure? Do you think we're closer to war today than we were yesterday? I read every single comment and I want to hear your analysis. 3 Iranian submarines are tracking an American carrier strike group. Both sides claim they're operating legally. Both sides are prepared to use force if threatened. The next 72 hours will determine whether this crisis ends in diplomatic de-escalation, sustained maritime confrontation, or the regional war that could reshape the Middle East. The clock is ticking. Thanks for watching.